What is up, everyone? It is the Wise Bubbler here, and today we are going to go over a new topic on the Bubble database design course. And this is, I think, one of the last topics, and that is privacy rules. So essentially, Bubble is like Excel, except the difference is it's basically a UI, or think of PowerPoint on that displays a database, but it's selective. So, unlike Excel, where when you share a document, everyone can see all the records, it basically decides what you can see or not see. And privacy plays a huge role in that. So, think about something like this. When you use Facebook, it doesn't, and you're not friends with someone, you can't see their email, right? And you can't see every single person's profile. There are lots of limited posts, only public posts that you can see. And in that way, you need to define in Bubble what users can or can't see. And more specifically, what I would say is based on the user, based on a rule you define, what you're going to actually do is hide columns. Okay. So think of like this. If I am a user that is just, let's say, looking at a online directory of users and it's a private community, or I'm looking at LinkedIn, for example. If I'm not connected with someone, I may only see this level of database access where I can see their name and title. But if I'm connected with them and we both had a mutual connection, then I can also see the email. So think of it as hidden columns and selectively based on a rule you define. Okay. In this case, if it's LinkedIn or something like that, it would be we connected. There was a mutual connection. It could also be an admin level access. Maybe if I'm an admin, I can see certain things. And it's very dynamic. So there's no defined way of doing it. It's up to you to define it. And those rules around what columns to hide, essentially, on a database are called privacy rules. And that's how you really secure your application is really when you're building out that database, you could set a bunch of rules on each table and decide which columns are not or are visible to certain people. And this is pretty core because otherwise you can accidentally expose all your users' emails to someone who shouldn't have access to them. And you may be saying, okay, you may know a little bit of Bubble and say, hey, but if I don't explicitly show on the UI a user's email, right? Then like how would they have access? When you're building an app and you, as an example, show the users table, even if you don't show it on the web page itself, like for example, on visibly, for example, I'm showing here all my files. Even if I don't show it visibly, I can see kind of these columns. In Bubble, if I were to show, for example, a users table, they will also be able to easily hack into all the hidden columns using a bit of, I would say, browser magic. So there's a way of doing it where you can see all the columns, even if you don't actually show them. So that's why is so important. Privacy rules are so important because it prevents it prevents the hidden columns from actually being sent to your browser, right? If a user is on your app, if you don't have privacy rules, it just sends every single column of the user to the browser when you display users. But if you have privacy rules, it actually prevents what is sent to the user's browser based on those privacy rules. So it's really the ultimate security level. And so many bubblers don't even pay attention to this. Extremely important to keep this in mind. So just going off of that analogy, think of like the database that you have access to, or the Bubble database, as like the backend storage of, let's say, a fruit store. Okay. There's like in the back, there's a storage facility. And as a consumer walking into a store, you see what's on display in that store, but you don't see what the stuff are in the back. You have to ask the employee to get access to that stuff. So you only see what the store owner wants to show you. And that's where privacy rules come in. And you can think about that as like the data or your database. It's a little bit different than Excel. It's like you selectively show what you want your users to see, or think about it as a store owner. You selectively show what, for example, if you're a shoe store, as an example, you only show the models you want people to actually see. And you don't want to let them know, for example, if you have a limited collection item that, you're waiting for holiday season, you don't want to show it up front. And so that's where security rules come in. Basically, this is programmatic, obviously not a real store, and you don't decide like manually each one. It's basically gives you a rule to say, okay, when do I show the front end, which is think about it like the store experience itself, what to send to the front end, which is like the user's browser, all the users' browsers. That's like the store entryway. And then the back end is where you store all your shoes that you don't want to show people. And you can selectively send to different users and show them on the front end different stuff based on these rules, right? So for example, if there's a really high net worth person coming to your shoe store, for example, a celebrity, you may want to selectively show them all your best merch versus if it's just a regular Sunday, you may not bring all that stuff out. Okay, long intro, but let's dive in. So in this example, we have a users table, and maybe it's just like a name, email, and title. And odd thing out here is you don't want to show everyone the email, right? So that's where privacy rules come in. So let's dive into Bubble and see how that looks. First, let's build out this table. Now we're in our Bubble app, and we're going to go to data types, and we're going to create a table called, let's say, 8 user. Cool. And we're going to create this data type, and we are going to add in name, email, and title. Okay, let's say name, and that's going to be a text, email, and that's going to be a text, and title, and that's also going to be a text. And now what we're going to do is apply privacy rules. So over here, what we want to really hide is, unless I am the user logged in, I don't want to show everyone my email, right? Exposing emails is actually the most common mistake. You don't want to show everyone. You never want to expose someone's email, because if they get spammed, that's on you. So you never want to expose people's email to random website visitors. And as an example, Facebook will never expose your email to random people unless you're friends. And I think even in that case, they won't even expose your email. So you want to really keep emails secure unless it's specifically an email tool where you allow people to email other users. In this example, we have this table, users 8, and you actually see privacy rules is in this privacy tab. So we have data types. We've seen the app data tab. We've seen the option sets tab. And let's go to the privacy tab. In the privacy tab, we pretty much just see all the tables we created, right? It doesn't look upfront any different than the data types tab, and that is correct. But there's a new thing, which is privacy rules, which basically allows you to restrict access to specific columns of the table selected. So right now I'm selected the table 8 user, which is the table I just created. And we're going to call this user email, right? So we want to gate off user email. And when you create a new rule, you get this like when, which is basically saying when X is true, there's multiple options here. So one is to view all fields. Okay. So over here, these are the default permissions. Let's start here. There's the default permissions, which is basically, this is publicly visible. You can see like here, there's privacy rules applied. These are all publicly visible. So if the default permissions are on, anyone can view all fields. So they can see all the columns, and these are the columns we added. It's a bunch of Bubble defaults. And then we have the email, name, and title, right? We have the email, name, and title. And over here, we have find in searches. And what that means is that when you search for something, let's say, for example, you want to display a list of users. If you search for those users from the database, from the backend, it will display those users. And it's not important right now. The main thing I want to focus on is on these fields. So Over here, the fields that we want to allow anyone to see, so everyone else, is just the name and title, right? We don't want anyone to be able to see your email, right? Let's say, for example, we're building a Facebook clone. Facebook doesn't expose your email to anyone except for you. So in this case, we want to, for everyone else, okay, so this is anyone who you show the users to, or a user object to, or a user record to, or you expose in Excel terms, you send, think about it as sending this table of the users to a customer or a user of your app or anyone else. Like when you say share. So basically you're saying, I want to share this table or for anyone with the link, right? And so anyone with the link is basically the privacy rule of everyone else. Okay. So that's an example where you'd be sharing it with anyone with the link is basically what you're doing when your app is when you're showing these fields to anyone who sees them. And maybe you want to show the slug and the modified date and the created date, and maybe not who it was created by. Created by is like the user created this record. And so created by, if like I created this record and then I had a collaborator and another person created another record, it would save who created the row. Record, again, is a row. So the next thing we're going to do is apply a privacy rule. So essentially what we're saying is current user is this user's, let's do something like this. Current users is this user. Oh, we would say current user's email. Does it not have an email field? So in this example, we're not using the Bubble built-in user table. So Bubble has a built-in user table, which is why we can't, when we say current user, it's evaluating to Bubble's built-in user table. But so let's go to the privacy rule there because we can't apply the same rule. But basically what I want to say is this user is current user, basically. And what that means is it would essentially be this user is current user. And it's throwing an error over here because it's a different table, right? I'm saying this 8 user, which is a table I created, is current user, which is Bubble's default table. So let's go to the Bubble default table, which doesn't have an 8 under it, and see exactly what this looks like and what I'm trying to accomplish here. And this user is current user. And what does this mean? So essentially this applies a rule for a record itself. Okay. So when I say this user, it's looking at the user table, the Bubble default user table, and saying, John, okay, so this record or this record or this record or this other record is current user. Okay. And what current user means is the user logged in at the moment. So if I logged in to Facebook, Facebook saves in the browser and says, okay, you've authenticated. You are the current user. I know it's Shua Klein. And then it's saying it's the privacy rule is basically what it's saying is this user is current user. This row, okay, John is current user, which is the user who just logged in. So essentially, I am John. I can see John's email. But if I am John and I look at Jeff's email, so this user would be Jeff. And basically the rule would not apply, is current user. Current user is John, but it's looking at this user, which is Jeff. So essentially, the only user row, let's say there were 1,000,000 rows and I'm logged in as John, the only time this would apply, this user is current user, would be to John. If I'm logged in as John and I put in my email and password, etc., then I would be able to see my email. Hopefully this makes sense. Think about it like you have 1,000,000 users and there's basically a rule that checks if you are the user in this table, right? And saying, okay, I see that John is saved and I can see that I am John, like this person who logged in as John. Therefore, I can show him the email. But if they're looking at a Jeff's profile and logged in as John, they can't see the email of that user. And so for everyone else, it would basically look like this, other than for John or whoever you logged in as, then you would be able to see the email. So hopefully that made sense as a first example. And it's a bit complex because we moved from our user table to Bubble's default user table for the sake of a video, but just think of the user table as Bubble default table. And you can see that they have access to all the fields, right? If this rule applies. And everyone else doesn't have access to any of the fields, really. You can give access to everyone else. In our case, you'd probably want to give to name and title, but because we're using Bubble's default table, they don't have the name and title. You can add it to the Bubble default table, but they don't have it by default. Okay, let's move on to our second example. Should be a little bit easier. All right. So this is filled out. So we have a Airbnb style, let's say, listing app. And similarly to Airbnb, if you don't know Airbnb, it's a marketplace where you can list homes for short-term stays and people can buy homes for short-term stays. And so essentially over here, we have publicly available. You want to show the house, the name, maybe a description and the amenities, etc., and maybe the host, for example, who will be protected by privacy rules themselves. But if that doesn't make sense, it's okay. But you don't want to expose the address, right? Imagine Airbnb exposed everyone's address before they booked or if they were logged out. That would be a disaster. You don't want to expose people's addresses every time you show the listings publicly. With Airbnb, you book the house and then you get a message with the address. You never actually see the address. You'll see the general area a lot, but you'll never see the exact address. And I think they have very advanced tools of how they manage that. So over here, let's get this table into Bubble. And what we're going to do is put a privacy rule that basically says, unless you are the guy who posted this listing of an apartment or house, then the address is not visible to you. So unless the current user is this house listings posted by, it's not visible. That way, nobody will ever see the address, but maybe it'll have a messenger feature on the platform where when someone books, you send them an automated message with the address or something like that. But you never want to expose it on the listing. And there are more advanced ways of doing it, but to keep it simple, we only want to expose the address to the person posting, and then we connect them via email and they can communicate the address afterwards when somebody has booked their bill. So let's add this table to our Bubble app. So let's go back to data types. And over here, we're going to call this 8 house listings, or I don't know what I called it, house listings. And we're going to have a name, which is going to be text. And we're going to have a description. So we're just putting this table into Bubble, defining exactly how it'll look like. And then we're going to add address. So we want to save the address somewhere, and we can do it as a geographical address, which is cool. And then amenities, and maybe this will be like a list of texts. We can also create a different table from it, but to keep it simple, amenities, a list of texts, right? Because we have like pool, yard, etc. And then posted by, and we're going to call this posted by. And this is going to be a link to the user table. I'm going to use Bubble's default built-in user table. That's generally what we use because I'm recording multiple videos on this same database. I maybe created my own user tables, but you never want to create your own user tables. Always use the default, and you can see that posted by links to a user. A user posted this specific listing. Again, here we're just defining the structure of the table. We don't have actually any rows or records in the table yet. Now let's define the privacy rule we said, which basically says that only if you are the one who posted this apartment, can you actually see the address. This is very important. Again, we don't want to ever show people's addresses or expose, for example, our listings addresses directly in the app. So we go to the privacy table, and then we scroll all the way down or go to the table we just created, which is the house listings. We're going to define a rule, and let's say owner of the house. And then we are going to say this listings posted by is current user. They can see all the fields and find this in searches and view attached files, etc. We'll ignore auto binding for now. It's not really important. But for everyone else, everyone who's not the person who posted this listing, they will see the name, the modified date, the slug, the posted by, the amenities, the description, the created by, but they won't see the address. As you can see, this isn't checked. So they won't see this column versus here, they'll see all the fields. So they will see the address if they're this house posted by is current user. Remember, posted by evaluates to user. It's link. And if you go back to some of the older videos, I talk about how to link a data type or a table essentially to a different table and create relationship and what called the relational database, etc. And so, yeah, that's it. That is the owner of the house. And that is the privacy rule we applied. Now we can feel comfortable actually building our app because we actually are protecting our customers, our people who are posting our listings, private information from being exposed to who we don't want to expose them to. Let's jump into the next example. All right. In this next example, we have for example, a construction marketplace. Okay. So construction companies can come and pay a subscription to list their company on the marketplace. Okay. So you can see the company on the marketplace. You can see Jeff Construction, John Industries, and hundreds of other construction companies. And they have to pay a monthly fee to be listed there. And then construction workers can come and actually apply to like work for a month or so, or just find work essentially with these companies. And maybe there's jobs, etc. I'm going to keep it really simple. Just the table for listing companies. Obviously, there's a lot more tables that will need to go, especially if it's like contract time availability, maybe messaging, maybe a connection to a different messaging service, et cetera, et cetera. But for simplicity, let's just look at the company table. And here we're going to have the name. Maybe we allow users to rate the company, aggregate the overall rating. And if we were building a real app, I would probably have a rating table with where the rating sits and the user, for example. But for now, just for simplicity, we aggregate the user into one field and the rating of the construction company. So the potential employees can see exactly how well this company is. A contact email, and this is a personal contact email, and then a subscription ID. So when a construction company subscribes, let's say they pay $100 a month to the platform, and they use a service called, for example, Stripe, which is a payment processing company, you save the subscription ID so you know this company is subscribed, and then you can save whether they're active. So if they're paying the subscription, they'll be active. If not, they cancel the subscription, they won't be active, and they won't appear as a company that you can find jobs with. And then you want to aggregate the total revenue from this company, or let's say total expenses. Let's say it's the total expenses for the company over the course of years, and you want to aggregate it into a field or a column where you can save that. And then the company manager is the person who posted the say user, I want to link to one user, is the user who posted this construction company. So let's think of privacy rules here, right? So we're showing all the construction companies to potential employees. We probably don't want to show the subscription ID, right? That's like private. Like they shouldn't know as someone who's looking to work for this company, the subscription ID of this construction company that posted on the website. And they also shouldn't know how much they're paying the website, right? That's a bit of a privacy concern if they know how much the company has been paying, etc. And then maybe you don't want to expose the contact email. Maybe there's like a structured request on platform. Okay, I'm available, and they have to go through like an application process. And you don't want to expose the email online, but you want to have it there just in case for maybe other company partners or something. I don't know. Let's say, for example, in this case, you only want it for the company manager to see the contact email, and then maybe you want to expose it to other people. So I'm going to pause here and just basically allow you to try and create privacy rule where only the company manager can see the expenses, the subscription ID, and the email. And everyone else can see everything except those. Okay. So everyone who's on the platform can see the contact email, can see everything except for the expenses, subscription ID, and the contact email. I'll pause it. Hopefully that worked well and you got the table in. Let's do it together. And then I'm going to add in one last kind of level to this. And I know we're bumping a while here on how you can work better with privacy rules and make them more expansive, because they're very binary now, right? They're either the company manager and they can see it, or they can't. And we'll go a bit more one layer deeper above this. So let's first get this table in. Let's call this 8. And let's call it construction company. Construction company. Okay, cool. And then what we are going to add here is the name, rating, contact email. So let's start with name, text, rating. This is a number, right? It's either 7, 7.5, etc. Contact email. And this will be text. And then subscription ID, that's also going to be text. Subscription ID, text, and then active. And that's going to be a yes, no. And we'll just remove that question mark. And then we are going to have total expenses and company manager. So total expenses, that's going to be a number. And then company manager, so that's the person who posted it. And it's going to be a link to the user table. The default bubble user table to always be just user, no appended anything, just user. Okay. This is the user who posted it. And let's jump in to privacy rules. So after we go on data types, we go to privacy. And then we go to company listing, construction company. And over here, let's give it a manager rule. Okay. So the way we're going to do it is we're going to say this construction company's company manager, which links to a user, is current user. So if you are the manager of this construction company, you can see all the fields. But if you're not, if you're everyone else, you can see everything except for the total expenses. You can see the company manager if you want, except for the total expenses, contact email, and subscription ID. And those we want to gate from everyone who's not the company manager. And so if current user is the company manager, they can see everything. If you're everyone else, you can only see the fields that I have checked off here. Let's take this a step further. Okay. And feel free to end here if your head is spinning, or if it's hard to comprehend this, but let's add an element of user roles to the users. So for example, the way we can do it is with an option set, and we can call it 8. In last video, I went over option sets. Feel free to look in there. And let's call this user roles. And in this construction example, we just have 2 different roles. We have the employer, and then we have the candidates, right? Or the people looking for say construction worker. Okay, so we have 2 different roles. And what we can do is when we go to that data type of the construction company, add a user role, or just kidding. When we go to the default user table, and we can add a role that is called, and this is going to be user roles, right? This is a link to that option set we just created. You can see that the options are employer and construction worker. And let's say the default is going to be construction worker. But if you're an employer, we maybe want to give you access to also the contact email. So employers can contact each other, but we don't want the construction worker sending tons and tons of emails to all the construction companies, right? We want them to go through our traditional process. So in that case, we can add a new privacy rule. As maybe, again, I went to privacy, I went to construction company. And this is going to become employer permissions. This is where you stack different roles. And essentially, this role basically says if current user's role is employer, then they get to see the contact email. And so, for example, if you are a construction worker, you can basically just see these fields without the contact email. And these things stack. So if you're everyone else and anyone can see everything, can't see the contact email. But if your role, current user's role is an employer, if you're an employer, even a different employer from this construction company, you can see the contact email. So you can contact the company. And if you're the manager of this company, you can see everything. So it's like first this checks this and says, okay, you can see everything. And then it's, oh, okay, you're an employer. Okay, then you can see the contact email. Oh, you're the manager of this company. Then you can see everything. And hopefully this sinks in and you understand how privacy rules stack and you can work with different user roles. And it gets a little bit complex, but I'll stop here. Think about it. Try to think of hidden columns, right? That's the whole thing here. Is like, what columns are you hiding from who? So with Google Sheets, like you can share, it's either you share the whole sheet or you don't. With Bubble databases, you can share certain tables, but hide specific columns based on dynamic rules. And so try to think of that instead of the table as a sharing object. Think of the column as something you're sharing. And I'll stop here. Thank you for watching. Hope you found this helpful.